Okay, so this is part 2 of the rhetorical analysis walkthrough video, and we're in the rhetorical reading strategies and rhetorical analysis booklet. So in the last one, we went through this article. We go back up to the title of it. Scroll. In the shadow of COVID-19, mental health help can't come soon enough. And we went through and kind of looked for places that we might highlight for ethos, pathos, and logos, and some quotes that we might like for purpose. So now we're going to go and we're going to do a little bit more pre-writing, because the more pre-writing we do, the more we have to work with and the easier it's going to be when we actually start writing it. So the first thing I want to do is figure out the purpose. So the purpose of in the shadow of COVID, mental health help can't come soon enough. So that's just that little template I talked about before. So the purpose here is to persuade, and I think it's to persuade about the importance of adequate mental health services during the pandemic. It's probably a pretty good summary of what's going on here. And why is it important? Well, because these conditions are as real and damaging as physical health conditions. So that's a big part of what he's saying above. And I also want to make a quick list of some potential quotes and evidence I might use. So I kind of want to select 2 to 3 pieces of evidence for each potential point. So I'll have a pretty good bank to work from when I start writing. So the purpose, these will be good to think about for my intro and my conclusion. So I've looked in, we face the consequence of another inadequate and inaccessible system, mental health care. The psychological pressures that COVID-19 has brought, isolation and physical distancing, fast rising unemployment and economic loss have triggered what amounts to a secondary pandemic for millions of Americans. We need a mental health overhaul. Okay, so that's probably the thesis statement. So that's really good for me to highlight for purpose. Just as the 1918 flu showed us that access to medical care can't be limited to the few, today's pandemic confirms that we can no longer wait for a quality mental health care system. We have the knowledge of the technology, we have the capabilities, now we need the courage to act. So this was the end of it. And this is kind of his call to action, his inspirational message. So this is definitely something I want to think about for purpose. And for what he wants me to do. And then kind of another secondary thesis. This was his topic sentence for the second section. We need a mental health care system fit for the challenges of the 21st century. The question is, how do we build it? So then I want to think about ethos. And ethos is, again, it's about establishing credibility, establishing character, anything that makes me trust him. So I'm looking at things, well, it's published on CNN, which is a pretty reputable news source. So that's definitely an appeal to ethos, even if it's not in the writing itself. It's definitely something for me to consider. The byline, that little description at the top, indicates that the writers in the article are both experts in their field. So Wenberg is the chief executive officer for Corded Health, a mental health technology and services company, and Ezekiel Emanuel is vice provost of global initiatives and a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. So that's that kind of quote for that. And then these opinions expressed in this commentary are their own. So these are opinions, but they're opinions of some pretty well-established individuals with a lot of expertise. So that's definitely something that's worth noting here. I also want to note that the article is well-sourced. There are tons of links to back the reader up to confirm what the readers have said. So that's another appeal to ethos. And the writers include facts and statistics published by reputable journals, such as the Journal of the American Medical Association, and experts to support opinions. So they're definitely knowledgeable, and the inclusion of these additional sources makes me trust them all the more. So that's also going to be ethos. So once I've got, 3 or 4 things here to talk about for ethos, I want to do the same thing with logos. So here's a quote that might establish logos. According to research published in the Journal of American Medical Association in April of this year, about 3 times as many adults reported psychological distress in 2018. That same month, texts to the federal government's disaster distress helpline increased almost 1,000%. So this has got a lot of numbers and a lot of stats in it. And that's definitely logos. So, and then here's another one that's got a lot of numbers and stats in it. One reason there are not enough providers in the United States. One reason is that there were not enough providers in the United States. There were only 34 psychologists for every 100,000 people, according to the American Psychological Association in 2012. So we've got more numbers. We've got a reliable source here with the APA. There are even fewer psychiatrists, mental health specialists who prescribe medication, just 13 for every 100,000 in people in the U.S. as of 2018. So we've got some more statistics from the APA here, which the APA is, of the American Psychological Association, is obviously going to be an expert in the field. So this is going to be very logical. It also, again, could apply to ethos. But because we're focusing on data here, I think it's more logos. And then the overall organization of the piece is also very, very logical. It'll establish an issue, it responds with steps to improve, and it focuses on logical arguments throughout. So that structure, too, is an appeal to logos. Pathos, let's look at pathos as well. It's the least used of the appeals because the author is much more focused on logic here. But we still have some, and we still definitely want to include them. So as the pandemic has continued, parents, especially mothers, have reported feelings of grief, fear, and loneliness as they balance schooling their children and maintaining a full-time job. Furthermore, reports of domestic violence and abuse are increasing around the world. So this quote highlights the emotional impact of the pandemic and maybe an attempt to connect with readers who might be in similar situations, feeling grief, fear, loneliness, balancing their children in schooling and jobs, who might be dealing with domestic violence, anything like that. The killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others have increased anxiety and depression among the Black community, compounding the experience of trauma and psychological violence caused by systemic racism. So here we have these names of individuals that are likely to elicit emotional reaction. We have anxiety and depression. We have trauma and psychological violence. These are all pretty good indicators of an appeal to pathos. So it speaks to the concerns of a specific community and may remind readers of the feelings they felt when learning about these events, experiencing them, or even participating in the protests. And finally, for those seeking care, finding the right treatment can feel harrowing. All too often, people with insurance are given a 1-800 number on the back of a card to find mental health care services only to get the runaround. So the reader may empathize with the frustration here. The use of the word harrowing kind of further emphasizes that feeling of frustration. And so the focus there is on an emotional reaction. So I would definitely consider that pathos, and it's something I'd want to include. So then once I've made my list of quotes and notes, I have a pretty good cheat sheet for writing the rest of the essay. Now I want to nail down my thesis statement. So to do that, I'm going to take my purpose statement, and then I'm going to kind of expand on it. So I had purpose: in the shadow of COVID-19, mental health help can't come soon enough. Sorry, still recovering, and I apologize for my cat. The purpose here is to persuade. And I decided it was to persuade about the importance of adequate mental health services during the pandemic because the conditions are as real as damaging as physical health conditions. And we talked about that before. So then I'm also going to take that kind of template. In title of work, author's last name attempts to persuade, inform, entertain, or teach the reader about blank by using logos, pathos, and ethos. And now I just want to combine those two into one concrete thesis. My thesis will be, in the shadow of COVID-19, mental health help can't come soon enough. David Wenberg and Ezekiel Emanuel attempt to persuade the reader of the importance of increasing mental health services during the pandemic by using ethos, logos, and pathos. Okay, so I've got a really solid thesis statement. I've got a list of quotes. If I had a really, really long list of quotes that was, unmanageable, I might trim it down, but I've got about the right amount here. So I'm ready to start writing the body. So now I'm going to start writing the body paragraphs, and I'm going to start with ethos because that's the first one that I've listed in my thesis statement. So for my first one, I'm going to say, Wenberg and Emanuel use ethos to establish their credibility and expertise regarding mental health concerns. So I'm just basically rephrasing the thesis statement in the first point. And this just kind of goes back to what I was saying about, the topic sentence here is going to be about the author, the appeal, and why they use it. So now I want to start writing the exposition. And I want to start with my first point, which is CNN. So I'm going to introduce and / present it. I'm just going to put those in the same one. The introduce part is the article is published by CNN, and the present is which is a reputable news source. So then to analyze it, I'll just explain why that's important. So this tells the reader that the opinions and information are credible enough to be included by a well-known news outlet. And then I'll write my second point, which is about the byline. So to introduce that, to further stress their expertise, the authors include a byline that describes their expertise in the field. And present step is Wenberg is the Chief Executive Officer for Quartet Health, a mental health technology and services company, and Emanuel is Vice President of Global Initiatives and a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. You'll notice that I use their last names. In academic writing, we never use first names or only first names. We only use it the first time that we introduce an author. We will say their first and last name, and after that, it is always the last name. You also notice that I used some quotes here, and I just kind of integrated them into my sentence to further add credibility, to show this is something that comes directly from the text. And then I'll analyze those quotes. So from this information, the reader learns that both individuals are leaders in their field and know both mental health concerns and the mental health industry well, which makes readers more likely to trust the information that these individuals provide. So that explains how and why, like how it's ethos and why that's important. That's the analyze step. So then I'll do the same thing with my third step. My third point. So to introduce, to further strengthen their claims, the authors use a lot of links and data from reputable sources. Then to present, there are several links per paragraph on average, which shows the reader that the information can be found elsewhere and is valid. Present again. Similarly, a lot of these sources are from scientific journals, such as the Journal of the American Medical Association, or statistics from reputable groups in the field, such as the American Psychiatric Association or the National Institute of Mental Health. Then to analyze that, I'll say something like, sources such as these further establish the writer's credibility when composing this piece. And then I'll write my transition sentence for this paragraph. So the combination of a trusted source, demonstration of personal expertise, and data from reliable sources gives the reader the impression that the information in this article can be trusted, which makes the reader more likely to take it seriously. So the transition sentence is summarizing what I've said throughout the paragraph, the sorts of evidence that I've used, how it's ethos, and why that matters. So then after we write the first paragraph, we'll do the same with the second and third. So my topic sentence for the second paragraph is going to be, the authors also rely on logos to create logical arguments that are supported by data and statistics. So I talk about how, who's using it, what they're using, and why they use it. So my first point is on the organization of the piece. I decided to put that first because it's more general. So introduce, the piece itself is logically organized. Present, it starts with a hook, transitions to a clear thesis statement, and then presents both the problem and the solution. And then analyze, explain why. Using an expected and logical structure helps the reader see how the authors rely on reason in their argument. So points 2 and 3 are data and argument. They're similar, so I put them together. To introduce, the reliance on data from reputable sources further illustrates how logos is used in the piece. Then present. For instance, the authors write, according to research published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in April of this year, about 3 times as many adults reported psychological distress as in 2018. That same month, Texas, the federal government's disaster distress helpline increased almost 1,000%. Then I'll analyze it. By emphasizing that this information comes from recent research, the authors show that it is based in science. Following that up with a similar report from another organization shows that the problem is widespread. Then I'll introduce my next one, which is on the same topic. I'm just kind of reiterating it. Similarly, the authors use a similar technique when talking about the root causes of the problem. So to present, I'll say, they say in the United States there were only 34 psychologists for every 100,000 people, according to the APA in 2012. There are even fewer psychiatrists, mental health specialists who prescribe medication, just 13 for every 100,000 people in the U.S. as of 2018. Then I'll analyze. These quotes illustrate the lack of mental health providers in the U.S. and further support the claims that we need to make significant changes to how we address mental health in the country. And finally, I'll end this one with another transition sentence. The authors rely on data and statistics to demonstrate that the cause of this problem is logical, and a logical solution must be found as well. So again, I'm recapping what I've said in the previous paragraph, and I'm explaining why it's important, how it helps to inform their argument. And so we'll kind of stop here because we're running out of time for this video. So we'll come back in with the third of the walkthrough in just a few minutes.